Good morning, everyone. Thank you for watching this video of the Hershey's Mill Speakers Forum event, Stealing Wyeth. This is Bob Zink speaking, and I am one of the co-chairpersons of the relatively new Hershey's Mill Speakers Forum. This is our third event, and we're really delighted that you're watching us today. The Hershey's Mill Speakers Forum is delighted to bring you Stealing Wyeth with Bruce Mouty, who is the award-winning author of 24 books, including Stealing Wyeth, which is about the 1982 theft of 15 paintings from the Wyeth collection right here in Chester County. Bruce draws on his years of first-hand experience to offer informative and entertaining talks and seminars on a number of topics. Here is a short testimony from one of Bruce's presentations. Quote, "On behalf of all our members and myself, thank you for the excellent program. We are very fortunate to have you as a guest. History comes alive when you tell us about it," unquote. Following Bruce today will be Mary Landa, who is a walking encyclopedia of knowledge about the Wyeths and their many paintings, after working as Andrew and Betsy Wyeth's personal curator and collection manager for 43 years. She was also a collaborator with Bruce on Stealing Wyeth and a co-author of the book Andrew Wyeth in Retrospect. We sincerely hope you enjoy the show with Bruce and Mary. We also want to give a heartfelt thanks to our sponsors and friends of the Hershey's Mill Speakers Forum. It's only with their support that the Speakers Forum is able to bring top-notch presentations to our community. The supporters for this event are Dave Dorsey, who is sponsoring his third event. And Dave, we really appreciate that, and thank you very much for your generosity. And by the way, happy birthday, Dave. Today is Dave's birthday, and we wish him well. Van Tresca Travel, the Brandywine River Museum, the Marlene Golzinski team, and the generous grant provided by the Hershey's Mill Cable TV and Guide and Digest Group. Now, without any further ado, let's get on with the show. Headline, March 29th, 1982. 14 paintings and a lithograph worth an estimated $550,000 have been stolen from the family compound of artist Andrew Wyeth. The Hershey's Mill Speakers Forum is proud to bring you the story from 2 points of view. Bruce Mouty, who wrote the book Stealing Lincoln, is with us today, as is Mary Landa, who was Betsy's confidant for 43 years, is also with us. And as you may know, Bruce lives in Hershey's Mill. He's a prolific writer, and we think, this is directly from him, we think he's written 24 books, but he's not quite sure.
That's true.
The latest book, Small Town Cops in the Crosshairs, was released just today. So congratulations, Bruce, for a nice And he has some here today, so if you want to be the first to buy one that's autographed by Bruce, they're right over here at this table. Go for it. And Bruce draws on his years of first-hand experience to offer informative and entertaining talks and seminars on a variety of topics, including true crime, history, sports, business, media relations, marketing for authors, book publishing, and talks on books. So he's got plenty of stuff to write about and talk about. So, please welcome Bruce Mouty.
Sure. Thank you so much for setting this up, and I want to thank the members of the committee that got me here. I love to come. This is my second time for this, the Speakers Bureau, so thank you. Thanks for the staff, but I gotta say, isn't the reason we're here is for the dessert? I saw everybody bringing it in. I said, this is my kind of group. Thank you. And also another big thank you to Mary Landa, and you'll hear from Mary in a little bit. I'm so happy she's here because she brings a lot of information, but also Mary was one of the first people I went to when I started to research the book. Remember the lunch we had in Chad's Ford and got it all started, so thank you. I kind of joke with Mary, but I think it's true. I actually did a book signing with Jamie Wyeth up in Maine at the Farnsworth Museum, and everybody was really happy to see Jamie, and I was the secondary. But I think the same things happened today. Everybody wants to hear from Mary. You all heard from me before, so that's great. We are here to talk about the book Stealing Wyeth. And this is actually the second of 3 books I wrote on the Johnston Gang, because it's all Johnston Gang related. And that was mentioned, my latest book that's being released today by Schiffer Publishing is also a Johnston related one. But today we're going to do Stealing Wyeth. And I always like to start this talk. You have a lot of giveaways on the books, and they're over there. I'm also going to now give you an opportunity to win one of my books, and you can take any one that you want. But this is the rules. I'm going to ask you about a resume one of the criminals had in this case. And if anybody has had each of the jobs, you get a book. I know, I haven't given away any at the moment, but Benny LaCourte, he was a school teacher. Do we have any school teachers? There you go, keep them up. You're all still in the running. Were you chiropractors? School teachers and chiropractors? Both? No, down goes the hands. You were. How about, I would also go to barber, and then before I got to the thief part. So I'm pretty sure that I don't give away books. But Benny LaCourte is going to be one of the main focal persons in this, because Benny was really the mastermind. And he was a member of the Johnston Gang. And the Johnston Gang, just really briefly, they terrorized Chester County, also up into New York, up and down the East Coast. They would steal anything that wasn't kind of nailed down. Specialty were John Deere tractors and Corvettes. Heavy construction equipment. If you needed something for your home, for your car, put in an order. You'd have it at half price the next day. These guys were really good thieves, and they really got into trouble when they didn't want to go to jail. Of course, nobody does. And they decided the only way to keep out was to kill witnesses, including members of their own gang, and some of those gang members were members of their family, which really sets them apart. If anybody saw the movie At Close Range, Sean Penn, Christopher Walken, came out years ago, but that's loosely based on the Johnston Gang. They were much, much worse than what it was today. So this is kind of the background. Also, I'll skip just for a minute on my new book's coming out. It's called Small Town Cops in the Crosshairs. That was not my title. I wanted Loss of Small Town Innocence, because it's a true story. 50 years ago, November 15th, 2 Kennett Square policemen were shot and killed in an ambush. And the person who was convicted was a guy named Ansel Ham, who was a Johnston Gang member. And Bruce Johnson Sr. was the getaway driver that night. Davis Johnson was also involved. These guys are not great. So you're not, the gang we're talking about, true life and just evil. Yeah. Matter of fact, I was asked to give a talk once at a church on the Johnston Gang. I'm thinking, when am I going to talk in the church about the Johnsons? But then it really hit me. They really prove evil exists in this world. So this, what we're talking about with the theft of the paintings and the lithograph from the Wyeth estate came right after 3 of the brothers, Bruce, David, and Norman, were put into prison for committing multiple murders. So we're just a couple years past that prison sentence, and Benny's sitting around the table with Franny Matherly and Franny's wife. And they were talking about, I guess, what they do next, or whatever criminals do in planning sessions. And Benny said, I just read, and he's a smart guy, I just read the New York Times, and in it, there was a story about one of the original paintings of Andy Wyeth was put into auction. It was approaching $1 million. This was back in '82. By the way, the value of the painting stolen, I think, was way undervalued, even back for '82. And today, those paintings would be worth 15 million, 5 million, multiple millions of dollars. But anyway, Benny reads this, and he turns to Franny and he says, look, one of these paintings sold for all this money. Andy lives around the corner. He has a lot of originals of his own paintings. Let's go steal one. It'll be our retirement fund. How can you turn that down if you're a criminal? And Franny's was the master fence. If any of you have had, and usually when I go to places, somebody's always has something stolen by the Johnsons in some place. But if you ever had anything majorly stolen in the 80s and 70s, Franny probably handled it because he had connections in New York City, Philadelphia. He was known to get rid of big ticket items. So Franny said immediately, let's do it. So they're thinking and they're putting their heads together. And one of the hallmarks of the Johnsons, they did a lot of research. They knew, their victims and what they had, and they planned for it. And they said, the Wyeth estate, well known, very wealthy with the paintings. They must have a really, really good burglar system. You would think so. Who do we know that's a master burglar and knows burglar alarms? And they thought William Porter. Porter was born and grew up in Chester County, but had moved to Tennessee, and he knew everything about burglar alarms. One of the reasons he knew it is because his day job was installing burglar alarms. Actually, he was the owner of the company down there. And what did he do at night? He used that all that expertise to go in and steal. He had his scruples though. If you were a pre-existing client, he wouldn't steal from you. But it was also a really good marketing tool because some of the people he stole from came in and then bought burglar alarms from him. And he said, some of those people weren't honest either because he got to see the insurance forms of everything that was stolen. And he said, I didn't take a TV set out of that house. I didn't get that ring. They were padding their insurance forms. But Porter was a very good cat burglar. And after everything was over, he admitted to committing more than 1,500 crimes. He was serious about it. He stayed in shape. He worked out. He was always armed. He always had weapons. He knew all the trick of the trade. So Porter was the perfect guy to come down and help out to do the thefts. So they called Porter. Porter agreed to come down this one weekend. And when he got there, Benny said, "Hey Bill, we're going to steal from the Wyeths." And his response was, "Who are they?" I didn't say they were educated or knew anything about art or anything else. They were just good burglars. So they went around and they went to the Wyeth home estate there, saw the granary where the paintings were in, and that first night, Franny was actually the getaway driver. He drove him down. Porter goes in, looks around. He's trying to figure out if there was guards there, if indeed it was an alarm system. And he looked in and he knew there was an alarm system there. But he didn't think it was that sophisticated and he would be able to get in there and get the paintings. So he's doing good. He got an escape route, and their property borders the back of the Brandywine River. And what Porter told Franny was, "Hey, look, if I get in trouble, I'm going downstream to where the Brandywine River Museum is. Pick me up there if something goes wrong tomorrow night." So they're starting to get their plan. The granary has a second floor window, and Porter said, "That's the window I'm going to go in." So the next day they go to a lumber yard, they get a big ladder. That night they go again. Porter is dropped off at the front of the property there on Creek Road. Franny is the lookout getaway driver, and he does all this from a corner bar. And they had walkie-talkies. That's how they communicated. And they had, it was 82, and they had secret codes. I'm not sure if anybody else was listening into this walkie-talkie, but there was a tree at the end of the property. And Porter said, "Look, when I'm ready for you, I'll just call you and say, I'm at Tree Street." Like I would fool anybody, but that's what they did. So Franny's going back to the bar. and Porter's making his way in. He makes it very quietly. He's bringing his ladder. He can't find a guard on the property. And if I remember that night, Mr. and Mrs. Wyeth was invited out to dinner at Marshallton with a bunch of friends, so they weren't there. Porter gets up to it. He's got his ladder. He puts that ladder up to that second floor window, and he's brought around pillowcases on his shoulder to take out the paintings. And as he's getting up, he had a thought. And I read this, he wrote this. He said, I'm like the reverse Santa Claus. Santa Claus takes in presents, I'm going to take them out. So he's got the... I read some of the things that he wrote afterwards, and some of them just crazy. And some of them are... He was trying to write a novel of this, and it wasn't really that well done. He was always drinking beers and doing things. But he gets up to the window. And again, he's a really good burglar. Not much of a writer, but a really good burglar. And he says he's looking for pressure plates, alarms that he would set it off as soon as he stepped in. Couldn't find it. So he gets in, and he comes over, and he gets to the stairs that comes down. And that burglar alarm unit is on the wall. He's very carefully coming down to it, getting ready to disarm it. And then he said, what am I doing? It's not even alarmed. It wasn't turned on. So he opened up the door, took the ladder out and hid it, and went back to get the paintings. Now, the story on the alarm, why it wasn't functioning, there's two stories. The sort of the official one was it wasn't functioning properly. What really was happening, I was told, was that Andy used to set it off all the time. And he didn't remember the number and was driving Betsy crazy, so they just didn't bother to set it. So it actually functioned, but it wasn't on that day. So, Porter very carefully starts taking paintings off, takes them out to the tree, and after he gets a few of them out there, he radios in to his friend, who is still sober enough to answer and say, I'll be there. Drives his pickup truck, put I forget, it was 3 or 4 of the first paintings in the back of the pickup truck, and Franny says, that's great, good deal, let's get out of here. And Porter said, no way, I'm not leaving, there's more paintings in there. So he goes back, and Franny goes back to the bar, and the 15 objects of art eventually makes it into the back of the pickup truck. They are ecstatic, as you can imagine. They go back to Franny's house. They put them all on display. They were looking at them, and one of them said, we should call Benny. It was his idea anyway. So Benny LaCourte comes down, and he looks at them, and his thought was, take them back. Take them all back. You've cleaned out the Wyeths. Do you know who they know? They know President Reagan. They know all the police. They'll be after us forever. Take them back. And what does our burglar and the getaway driver say? No way, this is going to make us a lot of money. And actually that night they started calling around. And they said, we had to some of the people they thought they would buy it. And they said, look, we have this Wyeth. It went for almost $1 million. I'll give it to you for $500,000. How about 300? 200? $150? What was going on? And they soon found out they were not that easy to sell. Their friends didn't, their criminal friends didn't really want to put up the money that night. And afterwards, after about 24 hours or so, largely through Mary Landa's help and the records she kept, every gallery, auction house knew what was stolen, what they looked like. So it wasn't like you could walk into a place and say, here's a Wyeth, give me some money, because everybody knew it was stolen. So quickly they were having trouble getting rid of this. And this would cause problems for the police, because the police were acting on 3 theories when they got in. If you're a good art thief, and Andy said these guys were awful art thieves, good thieves, but awful art thieves. But if you're a good art thief, and this is major business every year of paintings and statues and things that are stolen. But if you're really good at it, what you do is you have a predetermined buyer. I want that writing chair that the Wyeths did, and I want to give you $100,000, and it's pre-sold even before it's stolen. And they were afraid somebody, somewhere, had done this. And these paintings were already to buyers, and they were totally gone. The Gardner Museum's theft up in Boston, it hadn't been solved in years, and probably that's what happened. Second possibility, Andrew Wyeth, well known throughout the world. He had collectors in Europe and Asia. They were afraid that the paintings were already out of the country very quickly. They were going to have a tough time getting them back. The third possibility, and this was very possible, that the thieves at one point would realize they can't sell them, but they don't want to be caught with them. So the idea was, we hope they don't destroy them. You can imagine all of these paintings worth all this money being destroyed. And that was a real possibility. Next morning, after they can't sell them, Porter goes back to Tennessee in his wife's Mustang, puts some of the paintings in the back seat, covers them up with his kids' toys in case he stops, and away he goes. Benny and Franny kept some. They're trying to sell them up here. They're contacting all their friends. And they did manage to sell several of them to a mushroom owner named Guido Frezzo. Guido loved to have good things. He didn't always want to pay full price for everything. And he had bought some from Benny before, so he actually bought a couple of the paintings. And of course, Frezzo couldn't hang it up on his wall of his company or anything, so he put them in the back room. And Benny's a really good friend of his, and they gave him good deals and stuff. In fact, Guido Frezzo financed the schoolwork and setting up Benny as a chiropractor. So they're pretty close. So he buys his paintings, and Mary can tell you more about that and other dealings you had with Benny. But Benny, at some point, gets a better offer or an offer for the paintings that Guido has. So what does he do to his good friend? He goes and steals them back. And when Guido figures it out, who does he blame? Franny, not Benny. And does Benny own up to it? Of course not. And these guys are amazing, but that's our good friend Benny, the chiropractor barber. He ended up his career doing some barber work in Kennett Square, and I was actually interviewing his owner there at the barber shop, and Benny was back there cutting hair, and I had the thought, no way is he going to get a scissors near mine now. So Benny has stolen them back, and he's off selling them again. The next morning, actually, when the wife came back, they didn't notice the door open. You wouldn't. Early in the morning, Andy gets out, takes his painting, does his walk around the community. He goes see, he gets inspiration. Andy's just, being the artist he is. Betsy had a friend stop over. They went out to brunch. They came back to the granary, which was Betsy's office. Door was open, and all those paintings were off the walls. You can imagine how sick she felt at that point with everything gone. She had to be steadied. She put down on a chair, and I think she had a few drinks to kind of steady her until she, Mary was called, the police were called. They didn't know where Andy was. Everybody's coming up. Some of the local police said, we've been telling them for years they need a better security system. We're not surprised they've gone. I always loved Andy's first reaction when he came in. And he was right, the concern. Anybody hurt? Everybody's safe, great. Don't worry about the paintings, I can paint some more. It's okay, but what a great attitude just to make sure his wife and everybody's safe there at the home. Later on, when he thought about it, he had a little bit of different tone. And he told this to the police. I think it was Dave Richter or Tommy Cloud. Dave Richter was the FBI agent. Tommy Cloud was the state policeman, did a lot of the investigation. And what Andy said, I've been good to this community. This is my home. Obviously, somebody from the inside took this. And he was kind of devastated and kind of offhand mentioned, maybe I should just go and finish out my years in Maine and just leave Chester County alone. But really, that violation, you can see how he would fit the bill. The investigation started. Like I said, Tommy Cloud, David Richter, and they were two of the main investigators in the murder case. Also, they started looking around. They thought it was an inside job, and from what I understand, Betsy, really thought it was also, and a lot of her friends or anybody had inside information. They were on the suspect list for a while until they figured out exactly what happened. So, did I mention that Benny LaCour cut one of the Wyeth's hair in the granary? And it was inside information. Again, it was Benny using his many skills to set up this theft. And that's why they targeted the granary, because Benny again was the inside guy. But the police officers looked and they said, this looks like a criminal case from around here. And what's the biggest criminal gang ever? The Johnstons. But the three brothers are in prison. But there's still other gang members out there. So it wasn't, they kind of thought they didn't have any quite enough information to really kind of look into them. So they started interviewing people in the community, including a guy named Jimmy Lynch. Jimmy was friends with the Wyeths and Jamie, and was sort of a painter in his own right and kind of a character, I guess. He's had his own brushes with the law. And they went to talk with Lynch, and he said, I didn't have anything to do it. But that Benny character, he asked me kind of a strange question. And apparently Benny was going around asking, what's the statute of limitations for stealing painting? Could be a little bit of a getaway. He might have been smart enough to be a chiropractor, but not a rocket scientist. So Benny's in there, and they talk with Jimmy. They go to Benny, and they know through Franny. So the gang's coming in focus. Benny's not about to talk. Franny's not back to talk. But the investigation's still going on. It's coming around to him. And the paintings, in the meanwhile, can't be sold except for Guido. It ended up that they decided, look, I got a couple $1,000 gambling debt. Would you take a Wyeth instead of... There was one story I could never confirm, but I heard it at the time, and I covered this case as a newspaper reporter. Somebody said, we're in Chatsford. I need a way to get to the airport. Would you give me a ride for a Wyeth? And I'm thinking, it's 30 miles away. Is a Wyeth really worth it? I never got that painting, that story confirmed, but they were trading them among each other. There's some great names in this, including Vinny the Meat Man Perry and Joe Cadillac, which we'll get into in a moment. So the paintings are kind of going back and forth. When Porter went back to Tennessee, he didn't want to get caught with them. He actually put them in plastic bags and put them in a derelict car in case the police stopped him, they wouldn't be caught with them. It's amazing what these work of arts did. So they're going around the country a little bit. They're being passed around here. One of the paintings ended up in the attic between some attic walls that one of the Coatesville criminals kept it safe up there. And they're starting to close in. It was kind of getting obvious that Franny and Benny had something to do with it. And the police had a little bit of leverage with Franny because he was out on a parole violation, and they figured they could lock him up. And they really pressed him, and he still wasn't talking. Benny's not talking, but they went to Franny's wife. And they said, Nancy, if you ever want to see your husband again, you better get him to cooperate, because we're going to violate him on all of his past. So somehow she got him to cooperate. And Franny, this is the first time he's really cooperated. But I guess Nancy said, I'd like to see at some point cooperate. So they worked the deal. And then they needed to turn our friend Benny. So what they did, they went to Benny's house. And Benny says, I was eating my gourmet dinner of spaghetti over the sink with a meatball on the fork. And he looks out the window, police car is coming. And it's Dave Richter and Tommy Cloud, and they get out of the car. That's not unusual for Benny. He's been visited by police on many times. But when he saw Franny get out of the car, he knew the jig was up. He knew that he was in a big problems. He knew that Franny had cooperated, and he was next. It surprised him so much that Franny did. He said, I taught you the fork went up above my head with the meatball, and I haven't seen the meatball or the fork since. But he then had to make a deal, and they started cooperating, and they were able to get into the underground, which involved Vinny the Meat Man. And Vinny was owner of a meatpacking company in Delaware County, and there was another office in Downingtown. And the feds were closing in. He was also a gambler, but he was in trouble this time for selling meat to schools and military bases and colleges because the meat wasn't really meat, not as he was saying. So they were really pressing him, and he didn't want to go to prison. He didn't do as the Johnson said and kill anybody. Well, he did later because he also was selling drugs that he did kill a DEA enforcement.
Wow.
People are all out there. I think a lot of people don't realize how many criminals are out there. But Joe Cadillac, who was the sidekick for Vinny, they got together and said, look, we've been offered those paintings. We didn't buy them. But if we get them, maybe the judge will give us a lesser sentence. And there's so many of them, we'll just kind of keep one back so when everything dies down, we'll sell it and make some money. Sounded good. And they apparently approached the police before they approached their attorney. When they got to the attorney, he said, now you got to give them in. You told them about it. So the deal was, turn them in and we'll put a good word in for your judge. And by the way, they told the Wyeth, no way do we cooperate with any of the thieves. We don't cut deals with them. Because also at that point, our friend Benny was getting a little worried about this. All these paintings, police buzzing around, he's not getting any money, and he sent a message, very cryptic, that he was sure the Wyeths would recognize it was from him. And basically what he was asking, if I get your paintings back, will you let me alone? And the FBI said, nope. U.S. Attorney said, nope, not doing that. Forget it. They did it. They're criminals, and we're going to prosecute. So all this is going on, and finally, Vinny the Meat Man decided the best we can do is get a good word into the judge. Contacts Dave Richter and everybody at the FBI in Newtown Square, and they make arrangements to return the paintings. That day, they had them all back. It was around Christmas time, and the thefts were in the spring. And Betsy was alerted. She was home. I think both Jamie and Andy were in Philadelphia doing some art business. Betsy's ecstatic and said, gather everybody at the FBI office tonight. We'll celebrate. She calls Jamie and Andy. They show up. They bring copies of the writing chair, one of my favorites, to the meeting. And Betsy said, let's call President Reagan. He can announce to the world that these paintings are back and the American public can see it. And everybody first a little happy until Dave Richter and Tommy Cloud said, nope, we don't have Porter in custody yet. We can't alert him to what's going on. Can't say anything. So they didn't. And it was so nice. They had all these prints of the writing chair, and Andy took time to personalize one to all the prosecutors and the police officers. The best story is when Charlie Zagorski, I think some of you might know him, former Chester County chief detective, he was state policeman, big gruff guy, and he's there in line, and Andy looks up here, what's your name? And Charlie says, you don't remember me, do you? And he said, no. And Charlie said, I stopped you for speeding in Chad's Ford, and you told me you were the painter. And I asked you if you knew my Uncle Guido painted houses up in Scranton. And apparently Andy signed the painting. Next time you stop me, I hope you know who I am. So it's great. They had the paintings back. And Betsy, if I remember right, made the comment, they were actually in better shape than some of the paintings they loaned out to museums when they were there. I think, if I remember, there was some problems with the frames or something with them, but it wasn't anything. So I'm now, I've been covering the courthouse for years. I covered the Johnson cases. I started out with the murders of the 2 Kennett Square policemen when the appeal started. And I'm covering the courthouse. Every day I go into the county detective's office, the clerk of courts, looking for it. And there's a certain rhythm to covering the courts. You can tell when something's amiss or something's out of place. Trials are the same way. And something was going on in that courthouse with the prosecutor and the county detectives, and I couldn't figure out. I had great sources. Nobody would tell me anything. One day, I walk into Chief Sikorsky's office to find out if he had any press releases, anything to tell me, and he's smirking at me, and he always liked to give me a hard time. So Charlie's there saying, he's just shaking his head. I said, anything new on the Wyeth case? I can't tell you. So what can't you tell me? He said, I'm not telling you. But he kind of left me off the hook, and he said, I will tell you if you promise not to print the story until I tell you you can. And again, that was predicated on getting Porter into custody. So I said, I usually don't make those, I didn't make those kind of deals because I can usually find out, and I don't want to be beholden to somebody like that you kind of sway it. But I had beat my head against the wall, and nobody would tell me anything. So I finally said, okay. And he told me about the stories the paintings being returned, and they need to get Porter into custody. So I made my promise, so I walked out, literally walked out his office, down the hall, turned the corner, and I saw a defense attorney, John Duffy, I knew. And John didn't even say hi. He said, did you hear they got the paintings back? Now, if I ran into him before I went to the office, I had the story of the season there, but there was no way I could print the story and say, hey, Chief, John really told me, and I didn't use your information. First, he'd probably killed me, and secondly, I knew I would never, ever get a story from the courthouse if I did that. So I kind of kept quiet and kind of hope nobody else got it ahead of time. I wouldn't even tell my editors because they would try to force me to write it. I made the deal, and I had to live with it. So all they needed was Porter. And they're trying to figure out a way to get Porter up, make the arrest, get him red-handed. So they went to Benny LaCourte, his good friend, a good friend of Guido Frezzo and everybody else's. And they said, Benny, you need to get Porter back up into Pennsylvania. Tell him you got another robbery. That's exactly what happened. Porter comes up, a friend of his. They got all the burglary tools in their car. They meet in a small restaurant parking lot in southern part of the county. Benny gets out of his car. Porter gets out of his car. And about 25 police officers get out of their car. He's in custody. He was armed, but they got him in. And with everybody cooperating, there was really only one trial. Guido went to trial with a guy named Salisbury John, who was a gambler from, I told you, great name. Salisbury John was a good gambler from Parksburg, and he was the only one really to make money on this whole deal because he was found not guilty, so he was able to keep some of the money from some of the things he's sold. Guido was convicted and went to prison. So they get him in, and everybody's working on their deals, and Porter knows he's going to go away because now he's kind of admitted to 1,500 crimes, and he's been in and out, but he wants the lesser deal that he can get, best deal he can get, and he writes a letter to the judge. He said, I'm really sorry for what I did, and he also wrote a letter to Andy, And he's told Andy, I didn't realize these paintings meant so much to you. If I did, I wouldn't have taken them. And that painting Shorty looks like my dad. And anyway, my dad's a whole problem because when I was young, he used to take me to all these bars. And I didn't really have a chance. And you know, every time I asked a woman to go out and date, they wouldn't go out and date with me. What do you want to do? You know, I had to steal. There was nothing else for me to do. It didn't really impact much to the judge, but there was another request that I always really liked. He told them, and he told Andy, you know, I found God in prison, which I really hope he did, and I want to make sure other youngsters don't go on the same bad path I did. So I want to start this camp for these kids. And Andy, would you paint a painting for me so I can sell it to fund the camp? That didn't happen. They kind of all end up in prison. I'm not going to tell you the whole book. The investigation, it's great. It's more ups and downs. But before I ask for questions, I will tell you the postscript to this. There's always something that happens during the research that's, you know, kind of unusual or unsuspected. And I'm thinking, William Porter, born in southern part of the county. My cousin Joni Porter. Yeah, my aunt's, my mother's sister was married to a Porter. Marriage lasted like a millisecond, but you know, Joni was the daughter. I said, I wonder if they're related. So I called Joni. She said, you know that I didn't really have any connection with the Porters. I'm not sure if with the Bill Porter about that age involved. And she said she'd check. And she found a document, a court document with some estate or something, and on it was a William Porter who signed it. So I'm not sure if I'm related to the cat burglar or not, but it might be. You never know what you find out on all of these things. But Mary's going to come up and give you some more, you know, the real stuff on the Wyeth. You know, I love the Wyeth painting. I love the Brandywine River Museum. You know, we all have bad days, and as a reporter, I had a lot of them. And the one place I always like to do is go to the River Museum and walk around. And a lot of that permanent collection is just like old friends. So it was great to do this book. But we'll take questions, and then we'll turn it over to Mary, right? Right? Okay. Any question? And I will be over there if you want to ask more questions, see the books, that's fine. Anything? Anybody? You want to hear from Mary? See, I told you were more popular. You want to go right to Mary. We'll turn it over. Yep. Mary Land, the one right here. Come back. There you go. Thanks, Bob.
So how much did you get out of these thefts?
You'll never see my little man cave.
Thank you, Bruce. That was a great job. Well, I'm going to tell you a little bit about Mary Landa. She lives in Chadds Ford. She spent 43 years as Betsy Wyeth's personal curator and collection manager. She traveled all over the world for the Wyeths, and she provided input to Bruce for his book, Stealing Wyeth. She was a contributing author of the book Andrew Wyeth in Retrospect, and she is obviously an expert on all things Wyeth. So, without any further ado, please give Mary a warm welcome.
Hello, everyone. I want to thank the Hershey's Mill and Bob Zink for doing for doing this. It's a great pleasure to be here, and I love this place. I'm seriously thinking of moving. And I wanted to thank Bruce too, because Bruce had a chance to write this book, and by then Andy had passed away, and Betsy was living by herself in that big estate, and she was kind of in ill health. And Jamie and I asked Bruce to put it off for a little while, and we worked on it, and he delayed it. And he also did an addendum that said, I just wanted to make sure that no one thought that the house was still filled with paintings. I said, the paintings are safely stored in the Brandywine Museum, and there are prints hanging in the house now. So does anyone have questions? Can you hear me? Yes. I'm too short.
Ma'am,
Yeah.
you said safely stored in the museum
Yes,
last
the Brandywine River Museum.
But last year's flood, were there any issues with that?
No, they were all taken.
Not whatsoever.
And Betsy Wyeth died 2 years ago, April of 2020.
Uh-huh.
So,
Safely upstairs.
yes?
Is the Wyeth estate going to be open to the public at some point? Will it become part of the museum, the River Museum?
I brought a picture. I don't know if you can see this. I'll put it up here. But this is the current, and 2 years ago, yeah, you can pass it around. 2 years ago, at Hurricane Ida, it was devastated. I mean, it was just all 3 buildings, the granary where Benny LaCourte and William Porter stole the paintings, that had water up to 3 feet in the second floor. And that painting, writing chair, was the one, oddly, or serendipitous, oddly enough, that was the room where the burglar went through the window. And he stole that painting. So, right now, Bob was asking what I would be doing in the future. I'm retiring, and I'm turning my office over to the new curator. And what I'm going to be doing is working with the foundation for a couple of days a week, but one of the projects is putting the house back together, knowing where the furniture goes, and it may be opened up, but right now it's gutted. The entire building is gutted until we figure out what to do. It was filled with beautiful antiques, and they've all been restored and are in storage right now. But the flood's going to happen again, and that's the problem now, what to do next.
How did you come to work for Betsy?
I was working at a gallery, fine arts and antiques gallery, and Andrew and Betsy would often come in, and his name was Richard McCabe Murray, and they were good friends and customers. And when Richard suddenly died in 1979, Betsy came to me because I had known her over the years, and she asked me to work for them. And it was an offer I couldn't refuse. So it was a very casual interview, and at the time I was doing bookkeeping for Richard, and it was not my forte. And so my first day with Betsy, she took me up to the 3rd floor of the mill, and which was where her office was, and she was going through all of the records, and my eyes were just glazing over, and I said, Betsy, maybe at that time, no, I always called her Betsy, I can't do this. I said, I'm really sorry. Bookkeeping is not my forte. I'm really more devoted to art. And she goes, well, fine. And she snapped the book closed. She said, you'll be my curator. So that's how that happened.
So what were the specifics of what your responsibilities you were doing for Betsy? I mean, obviously you did a lot of different things for her. Could you tell us about some of that?
I think primarily stepping into her shoes, and when completed paintings came out of the studio, they needed to be photographed and measured and recorded. And then we were working on the Andrew Wyeth catalog raisonné, which is a record, every artist, of an artist, all their works during their lifetime. And working for them was really more like being part of the family. Diane Packer would know because she worked with me for I don't know how many years now?
9 years.
9 years, yeah. And it was just a very casual employment. And, I would go down to their house in the morning and then head off to the museum and then come back for drinks every night. And Andy always wanted to know who called, what happened. And he also wanted me to go into the galleries, the Brandywine galleries, and kind of eavesdrop and see what people were saying about his work.
Would you describe your Oval Office and where it was?
Okay. The Oval Office in the Brandywine Museum was designed by Frolic Weymouth, the chairman, specifically for Betsy. And as Diane knows, it was floor-to-ceiling windows all the way around, big expanse overlooking the Brandywine River. And that's where Andy would meet with special guests rather than bring them to his house. And Charlton Heston, Michael Jackson, a whole cavalcade, lots of actors that were filming nearby. Some of them were invited to drinks, so I got to meet them at drinks too. Yes?
How did you determine, or maybe Betsy was the one, I don't know, maybe together, determine which paintings were going to be out for sale versus which ones would be maintained by the family?
That was Betsy's choice. But, all right, I will say, Andy put his foot down. If he just painted something and Betsy loved it and decided to keep it, then if Andy had in his mind that it was for sale, then Betsy had to trade. He said, well, then you have to give up something else. So that's really, they worked together on that, but she was limited. Yes?
Mary, the ones like to travel, did you travel with them?
Yeah.
And did they have a favorite country?
They did not travel, no. Andrew went to Paris for the Académie des Beaux-Arts award that had only been given to one other American sergeant. But, and he, since he was over in Paris, he thought he'd go to London and see Sherwood Forest. Well, he was so disappointed because it was nothing like his father's illustrations of Robin Hood. But Betsy never traveled, no.
No.
They went to Maine, of course, but no, she didn't.
Can you tell us a little bit about the paintings that were stolen?
As I mentioned, this is the room where the burglary took place. In the photograph that's being passed around of the flood, yeah, the granary is there, and you can see the second floor door was the same room that this was taken from. All of these paintings were taken from. That one of Jamie's was particularly, Betsy was fond of that because that was one of Jamie's first paintings. I believe he was only 17 or 18 when he painted that. The Baron Philippe, we had to laugh because the wine company asked Andy to design a label, and they were doing that with famous artists, Picasso, everyone. And Andy painted this, but it was rejected because of the drunken spilt wine. They didn't want to project that image with wine, so it was rejected. And these are all local Chadds Ford areas. This is Maine. These two were from Maine. And this is inside his studio with the Saracen helmet on the sill. Wyeth was a great collector of costumes and actually a lot of props from his father's studio, N.C. Wyeth, who did these great illustrations.
How did Andrew Wyeth spend his day? Did he paint every day, or?
Every day. He, I once asked him, you're so devoted. How do you have that energy and discipline? And he said, Mary, I can't not paint. I would go crazy. I have to get everything out of me. So really his paintings, when he was angry, he painted vigorously. When he was ill, it was really interesting. He would go to the hospital and have tests done, and then all of a sudden these dead birds and these paintings of dead birds and dead animals would appear, and it was all that he was just expressing all of his fears. So, but yeah, he painted every day up until almost his death. In fact, when he was dying and he was kind of in and out, I went into his room and he was dreaming and his hand was going like that. He was drawing in his dreams. So it was just so much a part of him.
Mary, tell them about when they got married.
About what?
About when they got married?
Oh, it was this great love affair and courting, and they were up in Maine and they were sailing everywhere, and all of a sudden, after they got married in 1940, Betsy said he went into the studio, and everything changed. And she said, at 18, that was a hard pill to swallow. I realized that I came second to his paintings, and I could either stay with him, or I had to accept it. So I admired that woman because she really gave up her life, her skiing. She was a great skier, and she's totally devoted to him.
The Wyeth house that was flooded, the picture going down, will that eventually become part of the museum property or stay in the family, or what will they utilize the house for?
It's owned by the Wyeth Foundation now. It was going to go to the museum, but they had to turn it down because the liability, and there were so many restrictions on the will of where they didn't want to put handicapped accessible things on the barn, and it was tough. It was a big decision, but luckily it was 2 weeks before the flood, so the Brandywine had their own headaches. The whole first floor of the Brandywine Museum, the ground floor, is totally useless now. They have to shut it down. They can't even use that whole footprint. So they were devastated. So thank God they didn't have to deal with the property. We're already trying to figure out what we're going to do with it.
So is there a story about the IBM meeting?
I had to laugh when I met Bob Zink, sorry. When I learned that he was an executive at IBM, I wanted to tell him about the project. The Wyeths were good friends with Tom Watson, and they had always, because they were the quintessential all-American computer business, they realized that they needed to get into imaging, and Apple, they were way behind Apple with that. So they thought, what better partner than Andrew Wyeth, the all-American, quintessential American artist. And so they arranged to have a big meeting at the Oval Office, and executives and scientists, technical scientists were all around the table, and Betsy was holding court with them. They were all exchanging ideas, and they wanted to do a research and development project. So when I told my husband about the meeting and who was there, he said, "Mary, do you realize how much power and brains and money were around that table? You know, businesses would give their eye teeth to have that access." And I said, "Well, I guess." And then so the project lasted about 5 years. And of course, we're scanning, the scanner that they developed was the size of a small bathroom, and the optical discs were 12 by 12, and everyone has a scanner on their desk now, so they made progress. Do you want that other story?
Yeah.
About Tony? Bob was asking me who were interesting people that came, and after Andy died, maybe about 7 years ago, Tony Bennett stopped by. He was, it's so interesting because he had really started to develop his painting, and he came by as an artist. He knew nothing about singing, music, anything. He wanted to get into the drawers and see the actual paintings and all, or not even paintings, really, watercolors and drawings. That was his interest. And it was so funny, he was like a child looking at these, the techniques and saying, "Oh, that's how he did that." And I was always wondering, and he didn't want to leave. You know, the people, his handlers were saying, "You really have to go." And he said, "Can we see more?" And it was just, it's a side of Tony Bennett that not many people know.
So what are you doing now for them?
I just literally handed over the keys to my successor, who is in the Oval Office. Is a young man, very energetic, and I'm excited about him because he had watched the Wyeths for quite a while, and he's a scholar, and it's in good hands. But I would like to have a little more time off and maybe work 2 or 3 days a week. And I'm going to be with the Wyeth Foundation. And one of the projects is the Mill House, what to do with that. And I take care of the archives. And there's some tapes that I want to index. So it's more like a librarian archivist now.
Fascinating.
What was Andrew, what was his personality? Was he gentle or territorial?
He was very gentle and warm. I was lucky to be painted by him several times. And, you know, it was just the things that we talked about all came out in the paintings. He's very generous, funny, really funny, a real jokester, yet a very, very serious artist. I mean, even when I would bring all these little pictures of his paintings, and we're selecting images for a show, I would cross out the painting, you know, something that he rejected. He goes, don't do that on the painting. And this was just a piece of paper with little pictures of his paintings, and it was so precious to him, even that little image. So I knew that I couldn't touch his paintings like that. It was real to him. Yeah.
Could you share, did he have artists that he was a fan of or that he followed?
There was a Norwegian artist named Odd Nerdrum, and he was odd. He looked like a Viking, long blonde hair and very tall, and lived like he painted very much like Rembrandt, and he lived like Rembrandt over in Norway, and Wyeth had him to his place several times, and he admired his work. It's very Rembrandt-esque.
Was your Wyeth family a close family?
Very close, yes. 2 boys, Nikki and Jamie. Jamie is the artist and Nikki is a art dealer. Yeah, and then Victoria, who is Nicholas's daughter. She gives lectures. She would be good to give her a lecture. I'm sorry, I didn't hear you. Yes, yes, of course. But Jamie, ever since Phyllis died, and actually before, he really lives in Maine now, almost year-round. He comes down, in fact, he's coming down for Halloween, but he really, Maine is his real location now. He's very, very active with Janet Mills, the governor of Maine, and he campaigns for her. And a lot of his paintings hang in the governor's mansion up there. Yeah, Maine is his real love right now. That's it.
Well, that kind of wraps up our program for today, so thank you both, Bruce and Mary, and let's give them a great big hand again. Okay, one last thing, we have to do the commercial for their next event, which will be in May, and it will feature our own Teresa Grentz, who was just recently enshrined in the Naismith Basketball Hall of Fame back in a couple of weeks ago. And if you've ever heard her speak, you know she's a great speaker, and she'll be our speaker in May. So come on out, and when you see the flyer in the email from Sherry Kane. And so long, and thanks again for coming. I'm sorry, one more thing. We forgot to do there's a book on each table, and whoever at that table, and I know who the winner is going to be at this table, whose birthday is the closest to today, gets the book. So you guys figure it out. I know Dorsey wins at this table.